First things first, before we get into the presentation, a disclaimer. This presentation is for education and informational purpose only. Any mention of any company is purely for illustration purpose. It is safe to assume that ValueQuest has vested interest in any and all the stocks mentioned in the presentation. Me, my family, ValueQuest employees, and ValueQuest clients might have financial interest in the stocks mentioned. This is not a solicitation or advice to buy or sell any stock. Please consult your financial advisor before taking any action. With this, without any further ado, let's get into the presentation. So, bubble or a bull market? Oof, 2020, what a year it has been. From nerve-wracking crash in March to giddy heights of January. We have seen it all. If you are here today and listening to this webinar, consider yourself lucky. You have survived. And if you have been invested in the equity market for the past 10 months, then consider yourself doubly lucky. I hope for all our sake that we get over this pandemic soon. Is this a bubble or a bull market? This is a question that has been bothering almost all investors in recent times. There are so many anecdotal evidence of pendulum swinging quickly from doomsday to boomsday. How should we be thinking about this? So, US markets are clearly living through unprecedented times. Everyone is feeling euphoric. There are so many mini bubbles. Fake it till you make it seems to be the mantra, and investors seems to be egging it on, lapping up everything that comes their way. Even insider selling is resulting in supply being absorbed and stock shooting up even more after that. There are no sellers left, only buyers. Tesla is the leading example of the bubble in the entire EV space. There is exponential price growth. Other companies are taking advantage of that exponential price growth in Tesla, and they are coming in to raise money. New investors who do not know what they are doing are getting in on the Early investors and insiders are selling. Economy stocks are also soaring as they try and get a piece of the new shiny thing. The General Motors of the world are rising because they are getting into the electric vehicles. Crazy price movements in unheard of names with no connection to the fundamentals. Like a few days back, Elon Musk tweeted about a company called Signal. I mean, essentially everybody should get onto the chat app of Signal. But a completely different company called Signal went through the roof. I mean, this kind of behavior is clearly an anecdotal sign of a bubble. Now, what is happening in since last few days? GameStop, it's a company that's on the verge of bankruptcy. And unfortunately or unfortunately, many hedge funds are short in that. The Robinhood traders and the Reddit users of the world are taking on those hedge funds and creating huge losses for them. So if it looks like a bubble, feels like a bubble, then it must be a bubble, right? Now, just to put it in context, Bitcoin has surpassed all the past bubbles of the last 30, 40 years, since 1970s in extent. And again, it has all the classic signs. It is little understood technology. There are unrealistic promises of endless revenues, scores of small investors who want to get onto the bandwagon. It's difficult to understand and value. And people are buying only because it's going up in value. I mean, they don't understand why they should be owning Bitcoin, but they want to because the price is going up and they're getting richer. So in 2017 also we had something similar when ICOs, as they were called, initial coin offering, where all the rage, where a lot of money was being sucked in by these startups who were using the ICOs to raise funds for themselves. So are we in for a redo of 2017, or is this just, I mean, is this just a bigger bubble and barreling towards a louder pop? This is a very interesting chart. This is chart of, it's an index created by Goldman Sachs of technology companies which are yet to make profit. Just look at what has happened to this index in last 1 year. The index has shot up almost vertically. I mean, it's almost saying like the more the losses you make, the bigger the market cap it should be. SPAC is in space. Now, if you haven't heard what is SPAC, I'm sure you will hear about it in the coming days. SPAC is essentially a special purpose acquisition company. It is a blank check shell corporation designed to take companies public without going through the traditional IPO process. SPACs allow retail investors to invest in private equity, type transactions, particularly the leverage buyout. Now these transactions are very sophisticated, and ideally the retail should be far, far away from such kind of transactions. But here they are lapping it up, and right now they are having a hearty laugh and making money hand over fist. But is this restricted only to these small mini spaces in the market, or is this a more wide spread thing? Now look at the S&P 500 valuation. S&P 500 cyclically adjusted PE ratio is the highest it has been in its history, except for the dot-com bubble of 1999-2000. So even overall market valuations are starting to look a little frothy. Buffett indicator, as it is widely known, essentially market cap to GDP. Now this is world market cap to world GDP, and this ratio is at 124%, is higher than it has been in the last 2 decades. Obviously, the times are very optimistic, if not bubbly, so to say. And on top of that, you have people like Jeremy Grantham of GMO, who are warning us about bubbles. How should one react? I mean, we are here sitting in India. I mean, my stock, मेरा stock तो बड़ा नहीं और ये लोग bubbles की बात कर रहे हैं. अभी तो बेचने का time आ गया. So essentially, I never participated in any bubble, and now it's time for me to sell and go away. So when Jeremy Grantham says something, you have to take it, pay attention to what he's saying. He famously warned in advance of the dot-com bubble of the late 90s, the credit bubble that popped in 2007. He's even famous for calling Japanese bubble, the technology bubble, and the housing bubble. So when he speaks, we have to listen. However, it would be injustice to not provide a full picture. We have to take a look at what the full picture is. So he has been writing these notes since 2010 through this entire bull market that US has seen. You can't mention his prescient calls without mentioning the ones that didn't come to fruition. It's only fair to point out that he has been bearish for much of the recent bull market. People have been calling for a bubble for a number of years, and frankly, they have been wrong. 2010, he has been saying caution, 11 caution, 12 caution. 2014, he went to the extent of saying, this is a big stocks bubble, will end brutally in 2016. Then he went quiet for 4 years. And again, he is back in 2020 saying, this is the last dance. If I were to say it in terms of a test match analogy, essentially what he is saying is, this is the 5th day of the test match and we are in the last session and the tail enders are at the crease and the lights will go out anytime soon. Are we there yet? You know, it reminds me of the talking, annoying donkey from the movie Shrek, who kept asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Someday we sure will be. Not to sound too arrogant or prickly, but essentially people who get the bubbles call right don't usually get it right. They get the call right because you do not remember the previous calls that they had made. You remember only the last ones, which obviously sticks in everybody's mind. The note is out there, and suppose the bubble were to collapse now, again he would be a hero that he called the bubble right. But honestly, practically, it is of no use or of any consequence to us investors. Why? Because if you had heeded his advice in 1995 when he first warned of the dot-com bubble, surely dot-com bubble happened. But the 5 years post that, Nasdaq gave a 43% CAGR return for the next 5 years. Now that was the best return ever probably in any asset class, and you would have missed out on that had you paid heed to his advice. And similar thing is happening today. Since his first warning, S&P 500 is up almost 130%. Not only Nasdaq, even S&P 500 gave a 26% CAGR from 95 to 2000. However, let's take a look at some of the past globals and put the current bubble in a little bit of context. So the biggest bubble, now how is this big bubble counted? It is not from the point of starting, but it is the last 3 years price movement. So if you see, Tulip Mania is the biggest one. That was in the year 1637. Essentially, the last 3 years, the prices for tulip bulbs went up by almost 2200%. The next one is Mississippi bubble, and the third one is already Bitcoin. Now, it looks like at this point of time that Bitcoin is going to end up surpassing the tulip mania and the Mississippi bubble as well. However, I am not making a prediction over here. Mississippi bubble is an intriguing one. Let me just give you a little bit of history over here. There was this particular Scottish adventurer, economic theorist called Mr. John Law, who was friend of the Duke d'Orleans. In 1716, essentially they established Banque Generale. The bank had the authority to issue notes, and he then got the exclusive privileges to develop the vast French territories in the Mississippi River Valley of North America. Essentially, he came to monopolize the trade as well as he had the monetary authority. So he was controlling both the country's foreign trade and its finances. Then he can do whatever he wants with the market. But even that looks like it is under threat from Bitcoin. Even that kind of a mania is likely to be surpassed. So there was an interesting survey done by Deutsche Bank very recently, where they surveyed about 627 institutional investors, asking them whether there is a bubble. And everybody knows there is a bubble. 90% of the respondents in the recent survey, they said that there is a bubble for sure, or bubble-like sentiment is prevalent. Now, the consensus can be right, but consensus might not be right on the timing of when the bubble is about to peak. Not only do they know that there is a bubble, but they also know where the bubbles are. It's in US tech equities and it is in Bitcoin. So now I'll just quote George Soros over here. Show me where's the bubble and I want to be in it. Essentially what he means is that I am going to add fuel to the fire. The bubbles don't end and don't burst. There is a solid ground on which the bubble usually starts, and it usually ends with some amount of liquidity being sucked out by the US Fed. But at this point of time, that doesn't seem to be the scenario. So COVID was not the needle that pricks the bubble, but instead it is the fuel that feeds the fire. This has been the statement that I made sometime in July. And now it is pretty evident, yes, it led to a massive surge in all asset prices across the board. So let's take a step back and understand what has happened in the world. What kind of liquidity has been pumped in? It's everybody's favorite punchline that this is a liquidity driven rally. But you need to understand how much liquidity has been pumped in. And usually when this kind of liquidity is pumped in, what happens to the market? So unprecedented global coordinated stimulus has been provided to the world economy. Now, one might argue that this will have serious consequences down the line. Surely it will, but we will have to cross that bridge when we get there. We cannot be worried about the secondary consequences without taking into account the primary consequences of the same. If you are going to give a stimulus which is greater than 10% of the world's GDP, world GDP is roughly about $85 to $90 trillion, and the global central banks, only the large ones, have printed more than $9 trillion and counting, then what is the kind of impact that will be there on the world market? You can imagine. Last year, the central banks increased their asset base by 52%. And on top of that, in 21, they are going to increase it by another 13%. The devastation caused by COVID is nowhere close to what was caused by World War II. Yet the stimulus levels are reaching the World War II level. Besides the regular revenue and expenditure measures, the central banks have provided loans, loan guarantees, equity injection. Now, equity injection is something that was considered beyond the tools of central banks. It has now become an accepted method. Not many businesses are being allowed to fail. Even a business like cruise liner, where the revenues have dropped 95 to 99%, are also receiving a lease of line from the investors. On top of the fiscal stimulus is the monetary response. The interest rates have been cut across the board world over. And this has led to unprecedented low interest rates in human history ever. If you are going to give this kind of huge injection to the world economy, obviously there are going to be bubbles. Just to give you some sense of what has happened when the previous liquidity injections were provided and its impact on the equity market. So in 2001, famous Alan Greenspan created the first QE, or quantitative easing as it is known. Let's take a look at the proportion and its impact on the market. At that point of time, this was right after September 11, the global market cap was $23 trillion. The injection provided at that point, the money supply was increased from 6.2 to 10.3%. The fiscal deficit increased by 3.8%, and the asset purchase program was about 0.9 trillion. Now, 0.9 trillion was big. It was about roughly 3% of the global market cap at that point of time. This resulted in 6 years of bull market, and the market cap added was $63 trillion in 6 years' time. The global market cap went to $63 trillion. Now, but again, you cannot prevent the economic boom and bust cycle. So we had the global financial crisis. That point of time, again, the helicopter Ben came to the rescue of the market. Actually, they were trying to rescue the economy, but for all practical purpose, it was a rescue of the market. So he increased the money supply from 6.2% to 9.4%. Fiscal deficit increased by 7.9%, and the asset purchase program was triple of what was done in 2001-2. And what happened to the world market cap after that? 11 years of sustained bull market in US, and the world GDP, world market cap went from 32 trillion to 90 trillion dollars in 11 years time. And then struck COVID, which brought the market cap down to 65 trillion dollars in the March of this year. And now this time the James Powell and company has unleashed a tsunami which remains unparalleled in human history. And the first order impact of that has been that the global market cap has gone from $65 trillion to $103 trillion in 10 months time. Now we cannot be very sure that these liquidity injections will work the same way that it has in the past. We also do not know when we reach a stage where the Fed ends up pushing at a string and their injections don't work anymore. However, liquidity needs a home, and it will find one, and that is not going to change. It might move from asset class to asset class. It might move from geography to geography. It might move from time to time from various places. But until such event occurs, which sucks out most of the liquidity, like the global financial crisis that happened in 2008, until that needle meets the bubbles are going to grow larger and larger. So this was about the US market and the global market and the bubble. What about Indian equities? Is there a bubble here? So Indian Buffett indicator in India too is reaching a level not seen in the last decade. But of course, it is not the extreme as compared to US. But I would presume it is more because the markets are forward looking. While trailing GDP has been falling, the markets have been rising. Now the signs are more than evident that recovery has been quicker and more than anticipated. So a little bit of correction in the market and a little bit of time spent for the GDP to catch up, and again we will reach an attractive stage. Same is the case with PE ratio as we recover from what was clearly a temporary dip in earnings. Let us compare India with its past. So in India's history, there have been only 3 previous instances in the last 30 odd years where you can say were clearly bubble kind of situation. So 1992 peak, Harshad Mehta, at that point of time, India was a closed economy. But the important thing to note here is the 5-year cumulative return at that point of time were 740% or a 53% CAGR return and an ROE of 18% at that point of time. Compare that with the global financial crisis. The 5-year returns were 501%. Last 5-year returns CAGR was 43% and ROE was 27%. So essentially the prices were high and the profitability was high. So usually at a peak, the profits are high and the valuations being attached to those high profits are also very high. Now today, the market cap to GDP and PE looks a little kind of giving a red signal. But look at the other indicator. The corporate profit to GDP is at a low. Last 5 years return in Nifty is 14% CAGR. And ROE is 10.2%. These are not signs of bubble. How to identify an unsustainable bubble? So this is our proprietary model that we use to understand where we are in the cycle. So when peak economic cycle meets peak earnings, meets peak valuations, and there is a heady mix of fundraising and leverage, those are the conditions which have been prevalent for some period of time, and then a needle arrives, a crisis, some sort of crisis arrives, which sucks all the liquidity out, that is what leads to huge amount of wealth destruction. All of these conditions are necessary, but none of these conditions are sufficient on their own to pop the bubble. So just a visual representation of what I just mentioned. Usually it's the liquidity cycle that starts it off. The market follows the liquidity, then the earnings catch up, and then the economic cycle picks up. And there is usually a lag between each of this cycle. But there is a period where there is a point of maximum optimism, the maximum profits and profitability are getting the maximum valuation. And that is when the needle meets the bubble. Now, you know, a lot of people don't pay attention to the numeric indicator. In fact, numeric indicator can be misleading, but you don't forget feelings. So if one has lived through a bubble in the past, they will know what I'm talking about. You cannot forget that feeling. These are some of the anecdotal evidence that you will see around you. And at this point of time, I clearly see many of those missing. There is no way are we in a strong economy or there is positive news all around. I find there is a lot of skepticism. There is no euphoria. And people are worried about this not being a sustainable rally. So when COVID struck, a lot of people thought of it as a crisis. Of course, it was a crisis. But while everyone saw COVID as a crisis, what we saw for the corporate sector is this. It was an opportunity to reset a lot of things. Human ingenuity adjusted quickly to the crisis. Margins actually expanded, leading to a far lesser fall in profits than expected. So it was, in hindsight, very, very clearly an opportunity. But it was not clear to many people at that point of time. Now, people tend to assume that if there is a lot of liquidity, it is a birthright and liquidity will come to the equity market. It is not our birthright to attract the best of liquidity to India. Liquidity is very dispassionate and chases what it believes will provide the best return. So credit to India. We did provide them with a good enough reason to pour some of that liquidity into India. We still have to do our bit to attract that. And just to put the things in context, in the world market cap of $103 trillion, India's market cap is still at $2.5 trillion. We are still less than 2.5% of the world market cap. So, and it is in context of the India's GDP, which is also another 2.5% of the world market cap, of the world GDP. But why is India getting this special treatment? Okay, so this is what we believe is the hypothesis. Secular pillars for India have always been in place. We have attractive demographics, bustling and bumbling democracy, strong spirit of entrepreneurship. We are moving from socialism to capitalism slowly but surely. Economy was in a cleanup phase before COVID struck, and COVID actually led to it getting accentuated even more. It provided a reason for RBI and government to try and reinvigorate growth. RBI monetary policy started to have the trickle-down effect. Pro-growth government steps started getting noticed worldwide, and the reform intensity has only increased. And on top of that, we have just had a 40% fall in the market, and equities, the mid and small caps, which are already in the bear market since 2018, got really, really cheap, and we were attractively valued versus history and versus bond. So clearly the liquidity was attracted to India. And India, on top of that, managed COVID as well as its balance sheet better than most. So Indian economy prior to COVID, the credit growth has been falling since 2008. I'm quickly going to brush through all the indicators which essentially point to the fact that economy was not booming. We were not in a phase, and you also know that. I don't need charts to convince you. In fact, most of you might still feel that economy is not doing very well. Credit growth has been falling since 2008. NPA cycle, which had bottomed out in FY11, most probably has peaked in FY 2019. Public sector capex has been nothing to write home about. But next 5 years, the capex that is lined up is going to be double of what has happened in the previous five years. So PLI, private sector capex has in fact completely been absent. uh, production-linked incentive scheme is going to revive the private capex. We have already seen this play out in the electronics and the mobile manufacturing space. The next in line is pharma and chemicals, and there are 10 other sectors that are lined up. This is a timeline which provides which sectors are lined up for capex. And just to give you a sense of the cumulative impact this can have, $120 billion of capex over the next 4 years from private sector can happen for the PLI scheme. There has been absolutely no investment in the residential real estate since FY15. But the affordability ratio in real estate has reached very, very attractive level. Home loan payment to the income ratio is the most attractive that it has been. The effective interest on the home loan, the EMI that you pay, is working out to less than 4.5%. The tax incentives that you get and the interest that you save, I mean, for every 1% drop in the interest rate, it is essentially a 5 to 7% kind of a cut in the prices of houses for individuals. This is as mouth-watering as it can get. Now, I am not suggesting that real estate prices are going to start increase from here, but it is definitely going to lead to far more activity and absorption. And on top of that, state governments have started giving their own incentives. Corporate profitability has been at absolute bottom. Nifty 500 profitability to GDP has been falling from FY 2008 from 5.1% to 2.1%. So you see the PE ratio is looking good. That is because the profits have been falling. It is not that the price has gone up. It is the denominator effect that is in play. The return on equity ratio, which peaked at around 25-26%, has fallen all the way to 10%. Net profit margins peaked at 11.5%, have fallen to 5.5%. Asset turnovers, which had reached almost 1, are now almost close to 0.6%. On top of that, the Nifty EPS has not gone anywhere for the last 7 years. And if I were to take a little extended view, for the last 10 years, there has been very, very pedestrian growth in the Nifty EPS. But something has changed in the last 2 quarters. Since 10 years, analysts used to estimate 20-25% growth in the Nifty earnings and used to revise it downward by the end of the year. But in the last 2 quarters, analysts are behind the curve, and first time in decades, the earnings are surprising positively. Earnings upgrade momentum is the strongest in over a decade. It's not only that the earnings are surprising, but earnings are surprising by a margin. Nifty returns, I mean, it's a repeat last few years, not much return. And what has the retail investor, the domestic investor done? So retail, which had not seen too much of a return since 5-6 years, decided to flee the market on the first signs of returns being generated. This is pretty much what happened in 2003-04 as well, when Sensex went from 3,000 to 6,000, and most of the retail was out of the market halfway through the rally. This is not a sign of euphoria. This is a sign of fear. This is a sign that I have not made much money. I need my money. Give me back my money. I would say today the conditions look more like this. Economy is slowing. The headlines are negative. Earnings are flat. Media reports is bad. Skepticism is high. So many signs, I would say, which depict that we are more to the bottom of the cycle than to the peak of the cycle. And this is again the graphical representation of what the bottom of the cycle would look like. Again, the liquidity cycle is the first one to turn. Market starts following the liquidity. Then the earnings cycle follow and the economy follows after that. So if the point of maximum was reached somewhere in the month of March, really in 10 months time, do you really believe that we have reached euphoria level? The economic cycle does not turn so quickly. The market cycle, the market pendulum might have swung, but it will correct itself. We will find a level from where we will start a fresh up move again. COVID provided RBI and government with an opportunity to take decisive steps. Okay, government provided the credit guarantee scheme. This has actually led to more than 16% growth in credit for the SME sector, which we haven't seen. For the last, for the last 10 decades, it's not, for the last 10 years, it's not happened. It started happening in the last 2 quarters. The corporate tax cut that we saw last year, that's a huge, huge thing. And the benefits of that are going to be everlasting. For infinite period of time, the corporate tax will be 10%, that 25%, and that is an additional 10% to the profit. PLI scheme, the change in mindset of the government towards capital market, strategic divestment they are looking to do versus the earlier ETFs that we're doing. RBI has done a fantastic job of ensuring abundant liquidity. Rate transmission has been hurried up. Systemic risks have been avoided by making sure the capital is raised by the banks. We have one of the highest tier 1 ratio for the banks. Yes Bank and ILFS were averted very, very smartly. Willingness to look through the temporary spike in inflation due to supply chain disruption and keep growth supportive policies. Highest ever forex reserve and a stable currencies. Now, when you have government as well as RBI saying that we are going to do whatever it takes to support growth, you have to take notice. Repo rates are at historic low. India's real rates are among the most negative in the world. What does this mean? What is negative real interest rate? Essentially, it is inflation minus the interest rate that you earn in the bank. Our bank savings cannot even meet our inflation. Money is depreciating sitting in banks. Money is incentivized to take risks and find assets that are cheaply priced. So obviously this money is going to move away from the financial savings and into the assets that can appreciate. Doesn't matter what happens on a very small period of time, but over a 3, 4, 5 year period of time, this money, if it wants to beat inflation, will have to enter risk assets. And to top it, India truly did well in managing COVID and its balance sheet. Rewind 8 months back, this was supposed to be the worst of lockdown, smallest of fiscal stimulus, and everyone was sure Indian markets are going to underperform. But what actually happened? We did way better job of getting COVID under control. Now the vaccination has begun. The return of mobility is going to be way faster than anybody expects. And contrast this with what is happening in UK and US. They are still going through really, really tough time. Now, government also did not provide too much of a stimulus. So at that point of time, government was criticized for not doing enough. Now, not many people expected the economy to revive too much of a stimulus. But well, here it is, it has done. The sheer latent demand of India's economy has come into play and the recovery has been faster than expected. Now, on top of that, the government has the ability to stimulate it further if need be. They can borrow too. They have room for borrowing extra if they need to. Now, I find this to be very similar to the 2003-2008 cycle. In fact, I would go a step ahead and say that the cycle is even better than the 2003-08 cycle. 2003-08 cycle lasted for 21 quarters of economic expansion, and the average GDP growth was 9.1%. At the beginning of that cycle, the repo rate was 4.5%. There was a drop of 220 bips in US 10-year yield. There was 0.9 trillion liquidity injection. Money supply liquidity was running in a deficit of 2 lakh to 4 lakh crore, and fiscal deficit was at 9.3%. Now today the repo rate is at 4%. There has been a 225 bips drop in 10-year yield. Almost 8-9 trillion of injection. Today we are running a 6 lakh crore kind of a liquidity surplus. The combined fiscal GDP fiscal deficit is at 12.5%. The commodities are priced lower. In fact, adjusted for inflation, commodities are way lower. Brent crude is at $50. Banking NPA are lower. Tier 1 ratio is higher. Corporate leverage is lower. Corporate tax rate is lower. And we have many opportunities to take advantage of. I'm rushing through it, but essentially what I'm trying to say is the financial condition, the macro indicators at this point of time are even better than what they were at the beginning of the 2003 cycle. People keep worrying about a global crash. It is counterproductive to be constantly looking for a crash. To be a good investor, you have to be optimistic. No one can actually buy when the market actually crashes. For example, March 2020. I don't see too many people who can say that I liquidated my portfolio in Jan and I've deployed everything in March. Only fools and liars can manage to do that. It is easier to predict bottoms than to predict top, but it suffices to say that we might be stretched at this point of time, but we are nowhere near a crash. There have been only 4 significant market crashes in the past 30 years in Indian market, and we are nowhere near the 5th one. So please stop worrying about a crash. Take a look at what happened in the corrections in 2003 to 2008 bull market. There were 8 corrections in almost 5-year bull market, ranging from 9% to 33%, and 1 week to 4 months. So there are many other minor dips, which is very difficult to spot on the chart as well. Maybe we are in one such correction, and maybe this will be not a 10% correction, but a 15 or a 20% correction. Take advantage of that. Do not worry about a crash. We are not anywhere close to a bubble, and we should be worrying about. With this, I would just like to conclude that there might be pocket of bubbles in US market, but the rest of world is far away from it. The economic expansion phase is still right at the beginning, and there is a great wealth creation opportunity from 3 to 5 years point of view. India is witnessing the birth of a new bull market. To take you through this slide, there was a struggling economy. COVID crashed it, and we reached a point of maximum pessimism, which forced Government of India and RBI to start being supportive, which led to a V-shaped recovery, and the earnings upgrade cycle has just begun. So it is only a 10-month-old bull market. We will have corrections along the way, but we are nowhere close to a top. Thank you so much. We are barely out of the pessimism. So as John Templeton says, the bull markets are born on pessimism, grow on skepticism, mature on optimism, and die on euphoria. We are barely out of the pessimism phase, and people are looking for euphoria. I would call this as skepticism phase at best. Economy is far, far away from peaking out. Thank you so much.